my power and hence my internet blinked on and off because we're getting snow, although not that much snow. So I called in, so at the very least, I can still narrate my sections. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. And Yvonne, I did get your slides, so if anything, I can start presenting for you if you lose power. So awesome. I'll be prepared just in case. Thank you.
Thanks. And I also want to share that it's not just me presenting the results. I also have my colleague, Dr. Alila Faves, on as well. And so we're tag teaming the presentation. And so we just really appreciate being able to be on the agenda today to share the results of this portion of the evaluation with you all. And just as a reminder, because I know y'all have been already making improvements and tweaking things, and obviously have moved into launching your next 5-year cancer plan. But so we looked, it was starting with the one that just ended, the 2016 to 2020 cancer plan was our primary time frame for focus, and then we looked backwards behind that. But so obviously just know that some of this information happily is a little dated because y'all have already moved on and done some things. And before I jump in, I just want to check in. How would y'all like for us to refer to you all? Is it the Wyoming Cancer Coalition or is it the WYCC? How would y'all like for us to refer to you throughout the presentation?
I think YCC is fine. It's short.
Okay. It just hit Lee and I, and it was like, well, we should check just like someone's name. You don't want to make assumptions. So thank you. So some of these slides at the very beginning, for those of you who were on the Cancer Coalition meeting, the YCC meeting back in September, they'll look a little familiar. So these are just kind of our framework that I'm going to share initially. And so we set out to do a comprehensive evaluation for the YCC. So we were looking at where you've been, what can you take away from the experience of when y'all started to the point of 2016, 2020, and then where do you want to go from here? And so based on that, we looked at capturing, we kind of did a case study approach for the evaluation and captured both quantitative and qualitative data about the YCC's achievements, the extent of the YCC's influence, and whether the coalition functions as intended or hoped for. And we used the dimensions of success, so looking at relationships, process, and results framework, guided the design and implementation of the evaluation, and in particular, the member survey that we did. So we were looking to answer questions of, do members understand the goals of the coalition? What are the coalition's major successes? What are the challenges you all have faced? Are their constitution and level of membership engagement adequate to meet your goals? Are there strategic outreach methods needed for membership? What factors affect whether it's positive or negative coalition maintenance? And then is the size of membership an appropriate gauge of engagement? And what other measures could we use for engagement? So this is, I know, for the longstanding members, this is all review information, but since you do have some new members that joined the meeting today, we just wanted to go over who you all are. The mission is to develop and implement a collaborative and comprehensive approach to address cancer prevention, early detection, access to care, diagnosis and treatment, and then improving quality of life services to lessen the impact of cancer. And again, because I've taken a sneak peek at your new cancer plan, I know y'all gone down to 4 work groups, but with the 2016-2020 timeframe, y'all had 5 work groups. And then you have a steering committee that's comprised of 3 YCC members. And then you have a broad spectrum of sectors that are represented on the coalition, ranging from cancer survivors and caregivers to nonprofit community-based organizations, healthcare providers, and public health professionals are just a snapshot. I think there's other sectors that could be listed and included as well, but those were like the main sectors that we saw as we looked over the membership during the 2016-2020. And we know that the YCC work is driven and directed by the steering committee, while the action occurs to address the goals and objectives are carried out through the work groups. And during this time period, it was through these 5 work groups. So just hitting on some highlights. So I know you all, the history and foundation was laid for you all starting before 2002, but we just picked up with 2002 to hit some highlights of where y'all started. So in 2002, the Department of Health received a CDC Public Health Prevention Service Fellow to aid the state in laying the framework for comprehensive control program in Wyoming. Then in January of 2003, the foundation of what now is the YCC started with the formation of the Comprehensive Cancer Control Steering Committee. Then you all received the Comprehensive Cancer Control Program award from CDC. And then that really started formalizing a lot of the cancer control and prevention activities and framework for you all. And then in September of 2004, the Comprehensive Cancer Control Consortium came together. And then that launched from that point forward, the first Wyoming Cancer Control Plan, 2006 to 2010, was published. And that came out of the work of the consortium. December of 2006, so another chunk of time, the Wyoming Cancer Control Act was created and filed. Then you kind of move through setting up the WCRS. I know they weren't originally called that when they were first established, but they became regionalized around the state. You also won in 2009 the Sea Change Award for an Exemplary State Comprehensive Control Implementation Award. And then in 2010, the second Cancer Control Plan was published for 2010 to 2015. And then January 2016, you all put out your third Cancer Control Plan, which is, again, the frame time we're mostly focused on. And then you all also transitioned into the coalition, through the YCC. So congrats. That was a lot of work in a pretty short amount of time. So I'm going to hand it over to Lee to share a little bit more closely the focus of the evaluation.
Thank you, Ivana. I want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Coming
Yes.
through. Okay. All right. So we looked at several factors in our evaluation. We looked through the literature and based our approach on what we knew. The first had to do with structure type, and Yvonne, beyond the function, which Yvonne talked about just already. There are generally 2 types of coalitions, and one of them is membership-based and one of them is structure-based. And so looking at membership-based coalitions, there's generally 3 kinds. There's grassroots that respond to a crisis. There's professionals that are formed by professional organizations, either responding to a crisis or as a long-term approach, and community-based coalitions that are a blend of professionals and grassroots leaders to influence long-term community health and welfare. And YCC meets the criteria for both a professional and a community-based coalition. So So you are a kind of a blend in that category. And then in structure-based coalitions, there's again three types. One is the organization set, which is a group of cooperative organizations that improve resources or services under an umbrella organization. There's networks, which are subgroups within an organization system that provide services. And then there is action set structure, which is issue specific and may include ad hoc membership to address a specific issue. And WYCC, again, in this structure, kind of straddles the network and the action set coalition structure. So, so you all are a blend in terms of both of these. So we also looked at stages of coalition development. And the first really important thing to always remember is that all coalitions and networks evolve over time. And there are developmental tasks that are required starting with formation and going all the way through the various stages. But they also are not linear. So that is another important thing to remember. The literature includes structures in various levels of detail. We are using this one as kind of high level. So with 3 stages of the first one being formation, which includes the creation of a new coalition, but it also includes reconstitution of an existing coalition or formalization of an existing coalition. And the developmental tasks at this stage are, convening a group, making sure you have representation, identifying administrative support and leadership, and establishing the structure and processes that guide communication, decision-making, and conflict resolution. So that formation stage is really task heavy in terms of pulling everything together, and then moving into the maintenance stage, which is about monitoring and upkeeping and sustaining involvement and collaborative energy and implementation of the strategies. And then the higher level, the highest level is institutionalization, and the focus of this third stage is sustainability, and the tasks are successful strategies result in outcomes. And this is at this point when a coalition has institutionalized this process, that's when it may be accepted by a community organization or become institutionalized as a long-term coalition, such as forming a 501c3. It's where the coalition is when the coalition is really able to sustain itself. And the other point I just want to make is that, again, not necessarily linear, so it may move between stages, and the movement and the changes really depend upon contextual and internal factors. So the factors that influence coalition function either exist outside of the coalition or within the coalition. And the contextual factors include things like geography, political climate, social norms, history of collaboration, and community readiness. And in your case, that probably some of the factors that have influenced your development and your function are the rural nature of the state, social norms and culture of the different constituencies of the people, the communities and the people that you serve. You've got a long history of collaboration starting back around 2000. And community readiness, as we found and heard, that there's a lot of transition and turnover among staff in the communities and the organizations that comprise your membership. So that could have an impact in community readiness. So all those kind of contextual factors which change and influence each other. So it's like a total moving adaptive situation. And the internal factors that impact organizational climate include formalization of processes, how well people understand their roles, the strength of leadership, whether members feel like their organization's missions align with the greater mission of the coalition. And then, of course, how well represented the community and the system is in terms of diversity, and how well they work together in terms of cohesion, and of course, resource stability. And that may include funding, and funding from multiple sources, preferably, but it also includes the resources that the contributions that the memberships are able and provide to the function of the coalition. So back to you, Yvonne.
Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit around our methods. And again, some of these may seem a little familiar for those of you that were with us in September. And I meant to apologize when I first started that I'm not on video. I'm just because I'm having some electricity and connection issues with the snow. I wanted to not overtax things, and so I'm off video. So I apologize. And then I'm not able to look at chat. So if there is anything related, like wanting to ask a question, if Lee or Star could let us know, if I'm presenting, let me know, and we can certainly stop and engage in some conversation. We do have points throughout that we will, but if there's a question about a particular point that was just shared, happy to stop and have some discussion around that. So Lee was kind of setting us up with what the literature was saying, and that definitely framed and helped drive our the way that we looked at the data that we collected for the evaluation. But just to kind of frame us, the purpose was to document the effectiveness of the YCC's internal operations and the impact of the coalition on and for its members, and then ultimately for what y'all are hoping to accomplish as a group. So we were really trying to tease out key factors that contribute to the YCC success and challenges, and key factors that contribute to member engagement and participation. Then that would go into trying to tease out facilitators and barriers for active membership and recruitment of new members as your focus changes from one cancer plan to the next. If there's some nuances that shift in that. So in the end, our goal is to really highlight the strengths and accomplishments of the YCC. So that can inform new member recruitment, look at how to shore up and improve group process, and developing lessons learned and recommendations for the future. So that was really the framework that we were trying to use as we went through the evaluation. So we had a few data sources, and they all are intertwined and inform each other. So we really was, trying to document the coalition structure and function so that it can inform the cancer program and the steering committee moving forward, which is a great time since y'all are launching your new 5-year cancer plan. So we did our own evaluation. We're calling that the 2020 YCC member survey. And the results, I have a range here because there were 4 main sections of the survey. The introduction sort of demographic questions, which we got 47 people initiated and completed that demographic section. And then we had questions around each of the domains that we'll review one more time before we dive into results, but that I had shared before, that dimensions of success, so relationship, domain 1, process, domain 2, results, domain 3. And with each of those section of questions that related to those domains, the response rate varied. And so it went from 47 to 38 to 36 to 31 through the domain 3 is what we ended up with. So we kept we didn't take any out because we considered them incomplete. We looked at every response within each section, and we just note the results, the number for each question as we go through them, as you'll see. We also had a section within the overall survey that was just for steering committee members. So we had 10 responses for that. And then we looked back at the 2018 YCC member survey, which had 18 responses. And then we did, obviously, the lit review that Lee just shared, the key highlights from that. And then we did document reviews, so documents related to the YCC, and we had 8 documents that we looked at for that. And that really helped give us the documentation of the coalition structure and obviously some of that history that I shared at the beginning. So for the 2020 survey, the survey was sent out to 220 coalition members, which, like I said, 47 being initiated and completed through that first demographic section, with the end response rate being 31 through domain 3. So based on looking at 31 being at the very last section of the survey, that resulted in about a 14% response rate. If you're looking at this, that it was sent to 220 coalition members. So, again, this is, we use the dimensions of success framework for coalitions, and this was, has been used with a couple of other coalitions. We pulled a lot from the asthma coalition that they use. So each state has asthma coalitions, and we pulled, they use this framework and had questions already drafted out. So we pulled from that very heavily, and then worked together with the cancer program to kind of make sure that the questions were getting to the true essence of the YCC. So again, it looks at the relationship domain, which is the quality of the connections between the people or across the people / organizations engaged in the work of the coalition. Then the process, so how is the work or task carried out? And then the results domain, so goals or tasks accomplished by the coalition. And let's see. And we had a mixed, so it was all online, and we had a mixed methods approach to the evaluation. So it was a combination of quantitative rating scales for questions relating to a domain or a focus area within the domain, and then open-ended questions. So people could free-form right in. And we did, as you can see here, for the quantitative questions, we looked at the weighted average, then the median score, and the standard deviation across the scores for a particular indicator. So we have domain, we have focus area within the domain, and then indicators within that focus area. And then we also aggregated them up. We aggregated them up to get the weighted score for the overall focus area. Then we had qualitative data, and we conducted a thematic analysis for each area. So within the domain or a particular focus area, for those open-ended questions, we did a thematic analysis, summarized what those themes were as patterns grouped together, and then we would give an example, like in the report, when y'all get the report, then we would give examples of some quotes that really highlighted that particular theme. And then we organize the quantitative and qualitative data around the topics of the survey, i.e. management and support of the YCC, which is a focus area within Domain 2. And then all of the findings were synthesized across data sources. So we were always kind of relating back to the literature, to what we were finding in the documents, back to that 2018 survey to sort of have that framework where all of these data sources were informing each other. So now we're going to shift into sharing the results. But before we do that, I do just want to check in and see, are there any questions about how we got here before we dive into the results, or any thoughts that anyone would like to share before I hand it over to Lee? Okay.
I'll unmute myself. So let's dive into the findings, and we'll start with some demographics. This first slide reflects length of membership, and it shows how long respondents have been participating in the YCC. And you can see that the majority fall in the 1 to 3 year range in terms of these categories, but almost 40% fall in the 4+ years. So this has, implications, or is a reflection of longevity, and has implications for interpreting commitment and capacity for sustainability. It's a very positive indicator. But a quarter of the people that responded, or nearly a quarter, were members for less than a year. So there's definitely a range across in terms of longevity. And then the next demographic is looking at types of organizations. And again, the diversity of membership is an important factor in capacity for coalition effectiveness, because it represents different touch points along the system that the coalition is trying to affect. Respondents could answer more than one answer for these. And so you can see that nonprofit organizations and the state health department had some of the kind of anchor organizations. And then other responses include private sector, Healthy Park County Community Coalition, and retired. An important value also is for YCC membership to have representation from the community that it serves. So people impacted and affected by cancer, and cancer survivors and caretakers are also recruited. And among the respondents, the 47 respondents, 28% identified as cancer survivors, and 6% identified themselves as caretakers. So approximately 40% fell into that category. Okay, so moving into domain 1, which is about the relationships and the quality of connections between people representing organizations who are part of the engaged in the work. And so the survey included a mixture of questions using the 5-point Likert scale and open-ended questions. And as Yvonne mentioned, there's within the domain, there are focus areas, and within the focus areas, there are indicators. We are going to be talking, showing kind of a higher level in terms of the focus, in terms of the focus areas, but we'll be talking about some of the indicators. So the focus areas assessed and addressed in domain 1 are group structure and dynamics, benefits to participation, results of participation, and overall satisfaction with participation. And this first graph here is kind of part of the demographics again, but it fits nicely in within this domain, looks at member engagement. So what this shows is that the members, what it shows is that there's a 68% the activities that people reported that they were involved with. That most of the people, 68% reported that some of the activities that they are engaged in is sharing information with the community. And another large group, although much lower percentage, shares community information back to the YCC. So we can see that communication and sharing information is a major activity that people are engaged with. We also see that about half of the respondents joined a work group, but we also see that only about a quarter of them attended 75% of work group meetings. So there's implications for engagement there. And then about a third attended 75% of coalition meetings. So this also reflects the distribution of people that responded to the survey, also reflect the distribution of the membership in from the documentation, from the document literature, which says there's 42, basically 42 consistent members, that 31 of them attend large meetings sporadically, that 11 of them attend large and work group meetings, and some have been active members for 10 years or more. So this has implications for member participation and contribution, and also issues and implications around group cohesion. I just want to point out that what the agreed upon principles for participation in the coalition are four, that the members join a work group, that they attend in-person meetings, that they contribute to the bi-weekly newsletter, and that they share resources. So that's the requirement in order to be the operational definition of participation in the YCC. So, then this shows the four focus areas that are part of this domain, which were the results, the benefits of participation, group dynamics, and satisfaction with participation. The composite mean score for this group was 3.79, and that's again out of a 5-point scale. I just want to say ahead that these results throughout the survey actually align very well with the 2018 assessment that was done. So our findings were very similar. We couldn't make a exact comparison because the questions were different, but the themes and the domains and the concepts lined up. Within the group dynamics focus area, which was the first focus area in the assessment, there were 6 indicators, and the 2 indicators that had the highest weighted average score were listening and mutual trust and confidence. So this was respondents answering about their experience with the coalition and the coalition members. And the 2 with the lowest weighted average score were full involvement and participation of members and use of member resources. So again, this speaks to engagement levels. Throughout the survey, most of the indicators measured at a median score of 4.0, and some of them measured at 3, but almost all the way through, the median score was 4.0. we also looked at standard deviation. And so for some of the indicators, we saw very, respondents responding very similar answers, and some of them we saw a wider variation. The greatest similarity in this domain was in response to the statement that members listen to and try to understand one another, which was also the highest weighted average at 4.15. So that was the group dynamics section. And then the second section had to do with the benefits of participation. So there were 6 indicators in this focus area. And the primary benefits that respondents identified had to do with participation as networking and developing collaborative relationships. So those were the highest scoring benefits. And the ones that scored the lowest were getting additional funds for their organization and helping their organization move toward their goals. This focus area had the widest variation in terms of responses, with a standard deviation from 0.71 to 1.32, which is a substantive range. And as I mentioned, they're also consistent with the findings of the 2018 assessment. And then the third section was the results of participation, of which there were 4 indicators. And among the highest scoring those related to benefits of participation were mission alignment between their organization and the coalition, and participation in the coalition resulting in having a greater impact on their organization's mission. A greater impact than would have been if they hadn't participated. And this section is the one that scored the highest at 3.88 aggregate mean score. And then the final 4th one is the satisfaction with membership, which had 4 indicators. The highest indicator included respondents' feelings about their individual influence in the YCC, as well as the way members work together and the amount of networking opportunities that were provided. But the lowest scoring indicator related to satisfaction with membership in terms of participation. So this is where the domain scores fell. And some of the quotes that we pulled out of the results were, while the YCC has good intentions, sometimes the direction in implementing the plan is disjointed. Previous plan lacks substantial cancer control measures, and much of the work seems to be done by a few members, while others are mostly inactive. And this was one that I think everyone is too protected over their own ideas to come together and share thoughts. So this, suggests that there's some hesitancy for sharing because of possibly people, losing a competitive advantage in the landscape. Although another ones said that time commitment is worth all the connections and benefits. Working together enhances our ability to meet our goals and carry out our mission. And one person said that as a healthcare provider in a rural community, having any connection to data-driven organizations and extra funding may help improve outcomes for our patients. So a lot of positive responses about people's involvement in the coalition. Now, the internal factors that had the greatest, that rose as having the greatest impact to this domain were membership diversity and cohesion, as well as mission alignment, of which was very strong. And what basically the the learnings from this were that members acknowledge and appreciate the benefits of the coalition's collaborative efforts, that they see results from working with other members that might not be realized if they weren't involved, and that the YCC has formalized its mission statement, goals, and objectives, and has established clear roles for the work group and the steering committees. But what also came out of this domain was that beyond the defined work groups, member roles and responsibilities were less clear. So those were our findings, and I just want to stop here and ask, how did they ring to you? Did they ring true, or what reflections do you have? If there were any surprises.
Feel free to go ahead and unmute if you have any comments, or if you'd like to put them in the chat box. I think for me, a lot of that makes sense. We've done a great job of formalizing some key components of the coalition, and there's still work to do. So I'm excited to hear some tips on what might be the best place to start. So thank you. Anybody else have any comments so far on the evaluation findings?
There will be lots of opportunities.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pick up with domain 2. I do see the chat screen. It blinks orange for me, but I just, if I show it, it shows it to everyone. So I didn't know if that was maybe someone chatting in a thought or a question.
It was a comment that said, good information. So great.
Good, nice. Well, we hope we can keep building on that. So for domain 2, that's the process domain. And again, it's how y'all come together to do the work of the coalition and carry out tasks together. The 4 main focus areas are just overall, the overall processes for the coalition, then how you all see yourselves as being efficient and effective in the way that you do your work, and then the management and support of the coalition are the 3 focus areas. And then, as we've noted a couple of other times, then there's indicators within each of these 3 focus areas that I'll highlight some of the key ones as we go through. And just in terms of what you're seeing on the left side here, the quote. So the way that the survey was structured is typically you had several questions that you were doing, again, that ranking, that Likert scale, and sometimes it was, it was an agreement scale, or it was saying things were problematic to not problematic, those sorts of scalings, and you rank things. And then there were usually a few questions that followed that ranking question to ask and to invite respondents to share if they mark something really high on the high end of the scale, so in a positive way, to share their thoughts or comments that got them to rank in that area, or if they felt like something was really lacking for a particular indicator or a group of indicators within that focus area, what kind of drove that ranking. So that's how we pulled together the qualitative pieces. And in the report, so we haven't given you sort of the theme or the pattern, we're just showing some of the snapshot of quotes, but in the report, it has a summary of what the theme was, and then some of the same quotes that you're seeing here. So that's how things are structured. So as you can see here, again, we're in the middle range of the three-point scale. So it ranged from 3.34 for work group function up to 3.73 for the overall processes that the work group has in place and follows. And again, that's on a 5-point scale. For the overall processes, there were 4 indicators related to the overall processes, and the highest scoring indicator was related to respondents' agreement with the YCC's purpose and goals. So that's always positive. Everyone's on the same page with what y'all are hoping to address and accomplish. So that's like one of the first primary hurdles to jump over, is to make sure everyone is in agreement and is working towards the same goal together. The lowest scoring indicator was the way that the YCC has implemented its plans. So everyone's in agreement with what needs to be done, but the way in which, and I don't know that it's necessarily that they disagree, like maybe with some of the work group focus areas. I think it's more of that lack of clarity with how it's being done and how they are supposed to contribute. I think that's where, that's where the qualitative data was coming in, and that's more clearly outlined in the report for sure, to connect those dots. So the median score was 4.0 for this focus area, and the standard deviation was pretty closely aligned throughout all the indicators for this particular area, only ranging from 0.83 to 0.88. And again, although this area, when we compared it to the similar focus areas in the 2018 assessment, you all have improved with how you're feeling about your processes in this assessment from the 2018. And again, that's more clearly detailed and outlined than what we're going into here in the report, like really more closely connecting those dots between the 2018. So the next one was efficiency, or actually the next one is management and support, the next highest. This focus area included 7 indicators, with the 2 highest scoring indicators being the processes for notifying members of meetings and notifying members of conference calls. So making sure that you all are kept abreast and know when you all are coming together, whether as a whole group or in your work groups, and how you're getting together. That is done very well. That was a very consistently high scoring indicator. The lowest was providing timely orientation to new members. So that thread kind of played out throughout various areas of the assessment, that there is a desire to have a slightly more formalized and timely, like closer to when someone does join the coalition, to really get grounded in all of the important history that you all have, and just making sure that everyone knows what you all are working towards once they join the group. And again, there were 2 of the indicators within this area, this focus area, management and support, that had a median score of 3.0, but otherwise they all scored in that range that Lee had mentioned of the 4.0 median score. There was some pretty a pretty big range in the standard deviation across these indicators, ranging from 0.74 to 1.02. So potentially one of my takeaways is some of that might be impacted by newer members not having, a full understanding of the processes. So maybe things got scored lower, or maybe there was a range though. Some people were feeling very strongly that things were done well. Some had some feedback for that particular area. And this focus area was pretty consistent with the 2018 assessment. So definitely didn't go down, stayed in the same range of ranking. And then efficiency and effectiveness overall scored 3.6. this focus area had 12 indicators, so it was a big area, with respondents indicating moderate agreement with most statements, most of the indicators in this focus area. Highest scoring was email communication across and among the cancer program, the YCC leadership, so steering committee and members is effective in keeping the YCC members abreast of activities and products. So communication is a very positively noted and qualitative feedback, as well as I think in the scores in many of the areas related to communication. Lowest scoring indicator was the YCC effectively uses member organizations to reach its target populations. So I think maybe just connecting that up more closely with what you all are trying to accomplish, to helping organizations or leveraging the organizations that are your members to really reach the target populations that you're hoping to reach with the work of the coalition. So just getting a little more alignment across those two areas was what I came away with for that one. And then the last two areas are the steering committee function at basically 3.5, and then work group function at 3.3. And they were the same questions, just thinking about it, applying it to the steering committee and how it functions versus the various work groups. And so obviously a member was speaking or reflecting on their particular work group when they were answering those work groups, how the work group functions. So, and there were 4 indicators that were part of each of those areas. For steering committee, the highest scoring indicator was that the steering committee facilitated and supported team building across the membership. And then the lowest scoring indicator was that the steering committee built broad-based involvement. So while members did feel like the steering committee was supporting team building across membership, there was some improvement that could be had for really getting engagement and involvement across all the membership. And median score was 4.0 in this area. Pretty wide range of variance for these questions, which are indicators, which range from 1.0 to 1.06. And I do apologize, we did not put the number. I said we would. For domain 2, the response rate was 30. It ranged from 36 to 38. So it was 38 for these three areas, and then 36 for these 2 areas. So the number of people responding did go down in those 2 focus areas. And for both of these, actually for the steering committee, these scores that we're seeing here did shift a bit from the 2018 assessment. They went down just a tad from 4.13 from the 2018 assessment. And then for the work group function, the scores were consistent. So the work group function has stayed pretty consistently rated between the 2018 and the 2020. So to kind of bring all of this together, looking at the internal factors, and just to relate this back, so there were internal factors that we're listing here so once we looked at the data for each domain, we went back to the literature, and that was part of those internal impacts that Lee shared when we looked at the literature. And the ones that seemed most relevant for this whole domain and the focus areas within it are the formalization of processes. So I think there's a real desire to continue with the work that you've already started to formalize processes, to build on that. And when you do that, I think role clarity will come out of that. So there are some some, I think, disconnects or lack of understanding or knowledge around what a member's role is once they join, past like doing those key things of joining a work group and then attending, and then strengths of leadership were the internal factors that was coming together to impact how the YCC is functioning in this domain. And then the extent of member buy-in and ownership. I'm saying it's not apparent because I think there's some areas that it was very apparent and it was very highly rated, and then other areas it wasn't. And obviously there was several comments, I think, in domain 1 and I think in domain 2 that feeling like there's a core set of members that are really super engaged, but then when you get on, if you think about it in concentric circles, the further out you get from that core group, there's some varying levels of engagement and contributing to the activities of the coalition. And then these two quotes are just kind of sharing, I think, some of that information around the processes and then the role clarity. So in 2018, a quote was, "I was not aware of individual roles. It would be nice to have an informational handout to tell new people who the coalition members are and what their individual roles are." And then in 2020, a comment shared was, "There needs to be more communication through a more updated current website, including sharing how decisions are made and bylaws, having the bylaws easier to access, more clarity on what members do, how the coalition operates, etc. should be apparent and early, easy for both members and non-members to find." So we'll stop here. Again, want to just check in and how did the results from domain 2 come out? Were there any big surprises, or do they pretty much did they come into where y'all were expecting it to be?
Yvonne, this is Joan. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I just wanted to say that, I mean, everything looks like it seems to be resulting the way it actually is. I think these are pretty valid results. I was just thinking, though, that often, especially with new members, it seems that we don't have defined actionable tasks that need to be done. So often it's more of a theoretical concept of what we want to do. So it's difficult for a new member to feel like they're participating because there's nothing defined. The tasks are not specifically defined. And as to what we want to accomplish is often theoretical as opposed to defined tasks.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Joan Van Dornick. Yeah, Joan, I agree with you. And one of the things that I've been pondering as I've been listening to this is that a lot of the, I think, real tangible operational components of what you're saying also happen through the work groups. Yeah. And as I even look at the agenda, I see that we have our new cancer plan that we're going to talk about at 11 o'clock. And Joan, as far as you mentioned specific tasks and even starting with very, very specific tasks and end of year goals, for example, as measured by the cancer control plan, operating at the work group level may be a way of addressing what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that really resonates with me. Both comments resonate, and I think even just stating that, like that, you know, having that documented that overall, or if there's a particular work group that their work is more theoretical at this point, just having that documented so if someone's joining you, they can see that and they can go back to that and reference that. Some of it is, but I think you're right. Like, so even if as a whole, the coalition is working in a more theoretical space, it does seem as though when we were looking at documents and just reading through comments, that the tangible action steps are at a work group level. So I think whatever can be really clearly documented, and not to say that it's not ever communicated, but I think having it documented in writing and easily, where someone can easily come back to it, always helps, just because I know I'm a processor, so I may have to read something and review it a few times, and that might be my touchstone that I keep going back to. Especially in theoretical work, I may have to go back to something and really read it to ground myself before the next work group meeting. So it's nothing earth-shattering necessarily that we're sharing, like for these tangible steps once we get to those. I think hearing those comments, I think we're going to be in alignment with what we're thinking and suggesting, and it's not going to move the earth around what was this very practical, pragmatic things, but they go a long way. I know from being a member of groups to helping coordinate groups, like those little steps can really help support members. Yeah. I just wanted to check in, Lee. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
We have a comment from Cindy Glazer. She says that I think that people who are not employees may not understand how paid positions function and all of our other responsibilities. We don't just do the Wyoming Cancer Coalition work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cindy, I don't know if you are able to come up. You maybe talk a little bit more about that comment, or kind of what, elaborate on that a little bit more, but if not, that's okay too.
I can unmute myself. I just know that through experience with another coalition that I have that is run by the director of the Heart Mountain Free Clinic here in Cody, that when we have meetings, everyone sort of expects her or has the expectation that she will do, quote, all of the work. Well, that is not what her full-time position is to chair that committee. And so I just feel like maybe there's members that don't really understand that although this is a part of our work that we do, it is not the only work that we do, and that our scope involves many other aspects. And I'm not trying to be defensive or anything about the work we do. I just think that when people that don't understand that whole cycle look in, they're like, well, why doesn't this get done, or why doesn't this get done? And understanding how the paid positions fit into the process, I think, is an important information to share.
And that definitely speaks to the role clarity issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so somehow I got automatically switched over to computer audio. So I just want to check in and make sure you can hear me. And
You sound much better.
yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'm hoping my internet connection lasts, and I can certainly dial back in if I need to. I think, and that's exactly where I was going to go, Lee. I think that's a great point, Cindy. And I think, again, where that documentation, that's going to help support wherever you can document if there are paid positions, what are the roles and responsibilities of those paid positions versus a fully a member that's fully volunteer. For those coalitions that have a mixed, because some coalitions are full on volunteer, so everyone sort of knows, well, we're all volunteering our time. But for those ones that have mixed, I think that's an important piece, because I think it can be easy, like you said, to sort of assume, oh, well, that's part of their paid position, so they're going to handle that. But having that clarity would, I think, help everyone moving forward. well, I'm trying to keep an eye. We don't have we have a bit more to get through, and only about right around 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to hand it over to Lee to finish out with domain 3.
Okay. So the third domain is around the results. So the goals are the tasks that are accomplished. And within this section, there were 12 indicators, and 5 of them were specific to work groups, and 7 of them were specific to the YCC at large. And so the next slide shows the indicators on this one. The composite score for this domain was 3.9. This was the highest scoring section. And the median scores for all of these indicators was 4.0. And we see some of the highest indicators were that members were in general agreement with the mission, that members agreed on the strategies, and we've seen this in the other domains. So this is weaving through and validating. But the lower scoring indicators were that the initiatives were clearly understood, for one. And then in terms of the various work groups, the childhood cancer work group focus and the screening and early detection had very high scores, but one of the ones that fell lower is the HPV vaccination. And we be very curious to hear what if you have any thoughts about why that would have been lower scoring among all of the work groups. If anybody has any thoughts on that.
I think there was some staff turnover during some of the HPV work, and there was some very passionate people that were working on HPV that are no longer part of the coalition. So I think it's like a smaller subgroup of the prevention the prevention work group. And so that could be one of the reasons why is that it maybe not as well known.
Yep. And that's definitely one of those external contextual factors that can, come into play at any time and impact the function of the coalition. For the most part, people shared feedback in this domain, made positive contributions to addressing the priorities. The investment of the work group members is there across all the different groups. And now that we have a clear path, I do believe that we'll start seeing more progress. However, some comments noted confusion with the cancer plan and the YCC's priorities, stating the cancer plan goals were not clear. But some of the suggestions for how to leverage the work that's already happening was that the coalitions should embrace the cancer support community. There's so much work that's already done that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And this was kind of goes to a thing that we noticed throughout at different points and in different ways it came up, but that the membership kind of exists along a continuum. There's the members that are very focused on prevention and screening, and then there's members that are more focused on treatment and supporting survivors, so more on the clinical side. And it kind of, the people are coming from different perspectives when they sit at different places along that continuum. So that was just kind of an interesting thing that we noticed. Are there any other are there any other thoughts about that results section?
I think that one of the things you just said kind of ties into the comment that Cindy had made. There's not a need to reinvent the wheel. Some of the work of the cancer plan is already being done in the community. And so I think that that is the ultimate purpose of the coalition, is to bring together those people who are already doing the work. And ideally, it should align with their daily jobs of cancer prevention, screening and early detection, treatment, survivorship. And so hopefully the new cancer plan, because it was drafted by all of these work groups coming together on what is already happening in the community, that it may feel like it is more in line with their current responsibilities and not something that's like an extra duty. So
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. The other thing point that it raises is that important two-way communication from the coalition to the community, and also from the community back up to the coalition, and making sure that that two-way communication is there, and that it's robust, and that it's part of what everybody's doing continuously. Any other thoughts? All right, well, I'll hand it back to Yvonne.
Okay, so this is our last section of results, and then we shift into some of our higher level findings and recommendations, and keeping an eye on the time. So the survey, that I really shouldn't say distributed to survey was distributed to YCC members who served on the steering committee, but it was really not a separate survey. It was part of the overall membership survey. But after you finished all of the membership-wide questions through domain 3, there was a question that asked if you served on the steering committee. If you did, if you said yes, you went to the questions that we're going to highlight the results on, asking about your experience of serving on the steering committee. And if you said no, then it took you to the end of the survey. So it was an additional 10 questions specific to steering committee, the steering committee's experiences serving on that committee. Of the larger YCC membership completing the survey, so I took the 31, getting all the way down through domain 3. 9 had served as co-chairs based on our document review. So that was 29%. 29% of the members completing the overall membership questions, but we received 10 responses. So I'm not sure, I might have gotten like my count wrong of the number of members across the 3. So this one wasn't just specific to the 2016-2020, it asked, had you ever served? So that would have been looking back on all 3 cancer plan 5-year periods. So that might have been also the difference of that for those 10 responses. And 30% that had responded had been with the YCC in its various iterations, because I know y'all became the YCC in 2016, since 1998. And I apologize, I thought I had captured that little fragment and took it off. And then 70% of those who have served on the steering committee joined once it was established as the YCC in 2016. And then, so very kind of, we kind of looked at 3 key areas within what we call the support areas for the steering committee. And again, it was a Likert scale of agreement from 1 to 5. And so you can see the different scales. So we looked at meeting structure and format, which was in the statement that respondents were responding to said, I received enough information and support prior to YCC and steering committee calls or meetings in order to feel prepared to facilitate. And the rating, the aggregated weight was 3.78. So leadership engagement, the infrastructure supporting the steering. So that statement was the infrastructure supporting the steering committee role provides opportunities for leadership. So building up those experiences and skills around leadership. And that was almost 3.9 for that area. And then project understanding. I understood the purpose of the YCC within the state cancer plan. So that scored really high, which is good since the steering committee is the group out of the larger membership that's driving things forward and setting in collaboration with other key leaders within the coalition, setting the agenda and helping move the coalition activities to address the work group, to address the work group action plans. So it was nice to see that everyone felt like they understood it. They were all on the same page during their times of serving on the steering committee. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the qualitative comments that we got. So one was a need to diversify and engage in regular meetings would be helpful, and would also suggest that members of the steering committee be leaders of the work group. So kind of align that, even though I know the numbers might misalign, because I think now you have 4 work groups. In the past you had 5, and there's 3 steering committee members. But if there could be some ways to align those, I understand that sentiment, maybe helping just to streamline leadership. And there was some feedback around diversifying representation on the steering committee of the general membership as well. And then have structured topics for meetings and tools that can be used and implemented by the YCC in the real world. So maybe tying what I'm hearing in that is, well, having some structured topics that help drive discussions during meetings that relate to what you all are trying to accomplish in the cancer plan. And then also, if there's some tools that can be used and implemented in the real world. So not only if the group can develop some of these tools, could it help the work of the coalition, but it could also help individual work within the organizations that comprise the coalition. So these were some suggestions for strengthening coalition membership overall. So these are really some suggestions for some recruitment for the membership. Getting some committed frontline cancer professionals engaged in the coalition, connecting to those community level champions so that they can really be that voice of what's happening in the community and could really inform the focus of the coalition. Getting Medicare, Medicaid officials more engaged, survivors. I'm assuming that means more because I feel like there is some level of representation. And then younger people engaged. And then at organizations looking towards primary care providers as a whole, cancer centers, universities, payers, and then large employers would be some valuable members to start engaging. And there was one recommendation or one comment that I think makes it into our recommendations, but it fits here, of really closely aligning your recruitment during the 5-year cancer plan. So at the beginning, when you've launched your cancer plan, really looking at what you're trying to accomplish during that 5-year period and recruiting new members to help address those focus areas.
Okay. So this graph pulls the results from each of the 3 domains together, and as you know, as we've seen, the results domain yielded the highest score, mean score at 3.9, and the process domain was the lowest, but really they're very close. The scores are very close to each other across all of them. They're very similar. Respondents were also asked to share their the most significant achievement of the YCC during this cancer plan period. And so some of them focused on screening, prevention, awareness, and education, that some screening rates are going up, that people are more aware of the cancer issues in the state. Others focused specifically on the work of the work groups. So working with colon cancer projects, the palliative care workforce, and making an impact on Hpv vaccination efforts and the care plan for survivorships. And then a couple comments referenced the current cancer plan update. So looking at how to restructure the plan to a more readable and sustainable plan, and just the fact of people coming together to work on it together was a significant achievement.
I'm just gonna, we have this question at the end, but I'm gonna ask it here if y'all don't mind. Do these achievements and accomplishments resonate with y'all? Do y'all feel like these really represent the work of the coalition as a whole, or are they representative of a particular member and the work that they do outside of the coalition?
I feel that often it's a reflection of work groups as opposed to the coalition at large.
Got it.
Yvonne, we have a comment from Jack Wood that this is his first meeting, and he says, do we ever set up closed meetings with the leaders of the state, the governors, senators, et cetera?
I will chime in on this one. So thank you for the question, Jack. I appreciate it. Right now, the coalition is very heavily funded by federal funds. And so we are restricted in what would be considered lobbying. And so meeting with the state, the governors, the senators, legislators would be considered lobbying. However, there are individual members who do work within their internal organization that are allowed to lobby. And so there's just this delineation of what we do as a coalition versus what we do as individual people. And so as a coalition, we do not meet with the state, the governors, the senators, but there have been members who have successfully been able to lobby for funding for the coalition, or for the Wyoming Cancer Resource Services, the contractors, some of the coalition. So I know that Lisa Eads might be able to speak a little bit more on that when it comes to the actions that they've been able to do outside of the coalition and her work with that. And then we all used to have an American Cancer Society Action Network. It's ACS CAN. We used to have a representative from that who would lobby on behalf of ACS with very specific things that kind of tied back to the coalition. But it's a very complicated answer, but hopefully that answers it for you, that as a coalition, we do not lobby, but as individual people who are passionate and who are tied to an outside organization, they do it as part of that organization. Does that clarify that?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you just never hear. I mean, I'm really pushing strong about the early detection cancer screening program, and just never hear about it until the breast cancer month when there's a big push for all kinds of funding. But then the rest of the year, you don't hear anything. And it's very disheartening to me because it should be done daily. Doctors should be making sure people are getting tested. They should be giving vouchers out for free testing. We got a lot of single women and men, but a lot of single women that are trying to work hard and support their families cannot and will not go to a doctor to get testing until it's way too late, only because of the cost.
Yes.
We need to, we need to do more, and I'm kind of hard-headed about it, but you know, when I watch your daughter die from cancer at the age of 44, it's kind of rough to see. And she didn't even know anything about any of the, what causes cancer, what the signs were, nothing. And I've asked women I work for now, they don't even know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of disheartening for me to see. And to me, it's a 24/7, 7 days a week advertisement push. You know, that word should be out every day and you just don't hear it.
I think that understand one of the goals that, you know, we've kind of understood and tried to put together as we're moving forward is focusing on sustainability of the coalition. And I think that one of the key factors, and we'll talk more about that, but is getting diversity in funding. And I think that the funding source is the limiting factor in terms of advocacy. And I think that that's kind of and that's definitely one of the recommendations that we'll talk about in just a couple minutes when we get there. But that's definitely a limitation based on funding. So the key impressions that we came away with from our experience of analyzing all this data was that the YCC has strong systems to support key indicators of relationship building, that it relies on its members, and we just talked about this, to be the pulse on the community-based issues that inform relevant priorities, but that there's a lack of clear understanding how the YCC functions and what the different organizational roles are, and also a lack of consistent member orientation and onboarding. There is a high level of mission agreement and agreement with the strategies, but there's that disconnect between that agreement and member understanding and agreement with how the activities are implemented. And there are recruitment and engagement challenges related to staff turnover within member organizations. So some of the opportunities that we identified out of that are, you know, to really improve the cohesion of the group and enhance collaboration by promoting engagement and working for, you know, to make sure that the exchanges, that there's a dynamic interaction and open sharing. And some of that came up earlier when we talked about the possibility of people being hesitant to share, ensuring that the missions and of the YCC meets the needs of the member organizations. And that gets back to that two-way communication and membership having their fingers on the pulse of what the needs in the communities are. Making explicit opportunities for member contributions. And that kind of ties back to the promoting engagement and interaction and open sharing, that when people have when they are able to contribute, that it builds the cohesion engagement factors. And then again, optimizing communication from the coalition to the communities and the communities to the coalition. But we also see that the YCC is positioned to kind of reset its work and its function through formalization. That theme of formalization came up over and over again throughout our assessment. And so so we saw this earlier, the stages of coalition development, and keeping in mind that the process isn't linear, that coalitions can move back and forth between different stages of development, and that where you sit depends on your response and adaptation to contextual factors of which you have no control over, and internal factors of which you may have some control over. But we see that from our data that the coalition is at the formation stage. And again, this is not to say that it has never, that it sits here and it's never moved. But it's really, if you look at that definition and the focus area, that you're really at an opportune point to formalize the structure, the processes, establishing some bylaws that will promote clarity and ensure clarity for the members and address a lot of the factors that we heard throughout the assessment. And there's, we saw also that there's some opportunities to look at the core group and look at the membership and make sure, especially at this point with the new cancer plan, to make sure that the membership is really going to be strong in terms of the work that you're specifically trying to do within this next time period. The high level functioning within the maintenance stage requires that the coalition mobilize and pool resources as it evolves to form a unified entity that's larger than the sum of its parts. And this is what this looks like is when members actually can suspend the interests of their specific organizations in service of the goals and priorities of the coalition. And this, we did, in the words of one respondent, we did see a lack of understanding of how the organization's individual contributions support the collective work. And this one respondent said, I do not understand how the work of the WCRSs aligns with the YCC. So there's work that needs to happen that can get tied back to that formalization, that opportunity for real clarity. So, and yeah, go ahead. That's fine. And I just wanted to go back to what I was just saying earlier with Jack, is that this sustainability and this institutionalization stage is the coalition may be adopted or become its own entity in terms of a 501c3 that would allow it to engage in advocacy activity, which is one of the goals of the cancer plan altogether. So it's an important it's an important factor that you bring up, Jack. Yeah. So
we're going to shift over to recommendations. Looking at the time, I think we're gonna be able to move through all of the things we wanted to share. So really looking at the totality of all the information, the literature, the assessments, both 2018, 2020, document reviews, the key factors that the majority of respondents, and then relating them to those other pieces that we've outlined, stated as crucial to the sustainability of the coalition, included funding to support the coalition, so that diversified funding, staff to maintain daily operations, management, and coordination activities, and a mutually agreed upon set of goals and strategies to accomplish the mission. So the recommendations are provided with the coalition's goal of sustainability in mind. And the recommendations are interrelated within and across the domain. So we frame them within each of the domains that we assessed. And the stability of the coalition will always reflect relationships, the processes, and the outcomes, and they're shifting. So that's, stability will shift a little bit as y'all move forward, and then continuously adapting to the changes in contextual factors. So with that, within sort of the relationship membership domain, we the recommendations, so we had strategic recruitment came up as a key recommendation. So the size of the coalition influences the efficiency of how it operates. The coalition needs to be large enough to ensure diversity of thought and consistent, substantial participation, but small enough for effective management. So there's a sweet spot you want to hit between those two. And the recruitment should be based on identified priorities. And that, again, came directly from a few of the qualitative comments outlined in the cancer plan. And but also looking to the literature, this came up as a key element of strategic recruitment, and really looking for a diverse group of change agents at the community level. So as you're looking to recruit, asking questions around, are the people you're recruiting respected within their community? Are they representative of the community that they're serving? Do they have skills and or knowledge related to priority areas that you're trying to address? And do they have the capacity to make change happen at their community level? So it's taking what's coming out of the coalition and applying it and implementing it at the community level. The other one was foster membership diversity and cohesion. I know we've spoken of these several times throughout, but we're really trying to bring them all together and give some suggestions for how to think about them here. Strategies to increase diverse membership or access included inviting organizations to come and present. So not necessarily initially going directly to inviting them to be members, but have them come in and present on a particular topic. And that also really addressed a suggestion for reframing meetings a little bit to have some informational or skills-based sessions that connect to what you're doing in the cancer plan, but also sort of broaden knowledge base or skills base. So maybe as a way to test out and get someone introduced to the coalition and you get to know them, have them come in and have some guest speakers over a course of time. And then allowing them to participate in work groups on an ad hoc basis. So again, maybe thinking of having some levels of membership so that you have core members that are consistent throughout, and then maybe one out, it's this guest speaker coming in and helping address a particular task in a work group on a time limited basis. And then you have maybe the very far out, which is your larger number. They're there to help disseminate the information, but they're not necessarily actively engaged on a day-to-day basis or month-to-month basis in details of the coalition. Optimizing member contributions. So really looking at some various ways to develop methods to ensure members are given opportunities to participate. So like today, people can chat, people can share verbally, but just meeting people where they are and giving them opportunities to share in ways that they feel comfortable, particularly newer members may not always jump in and share things verbally, but might chat something in or send an email ahead of time or after the meeting, and having that be valued as much as speaking up during the meetings. And trying as much as possible to have like larger coalition work or work group tasks and assignments align with member interests and expertise. I think y'all do that, but just stating it. And then this did come up in some feedback, not always being aware of what's happening in the other work groups that someone is not a member of. And so really leveraging the newsletter, because everyone consistently spoke highly of the newsletter that is sent to the membership, with creating some standing sections for highlighting work around from the work groups and the steering committee. And then just checking in and seeing if there are other ways that people want to be kept informed of what's going on outside of their own work group. So process, on the process side, again, I know we've talked about this a lot, establishing rules of operation documentation, or a document that documents that. So a formal written structure of the coalition, even if it's brief, can be really helpful and is important. Identifying the mission, their criteria for members, for recruiting and inviting members to join, the term of membership, the meeting schedule and frequency. It should define the means of establishing standing and/or special ad hoc committees or work groups if you do that, and provide a list of standing committees and responsibilities. Then outlining, getting, the expectations of membership. If there were staggered terms, I think there's staggered terms for the steering committee, so documenting that. And then just building on that rules of operation, just getting a little bit more documentation for what, like outside, what that general membership. So if you did decide to have those levels and someone was coming in just for that information sharing, quote unquote responsibility, what does that look like? What does that mean for that? And then for each level, kind of having that documentation, if that's a direction that y'all decided to move in. For outcomes and resource stability, so that domain 3. So looking at institutionalizing membership at the organizational level, that was identified as a challenge because there has been turnover at the organizational level of members organizations, and so that then impacts representation in the coalition. So really working towards developing some really strong relationships with those key organizations. I know cancer centers have come up a lot in the various data sources we looked at as a key constituent, that it hasn't always been consistently part of the coalition or active in the coalition. So really thinking about how do you develop that relationship, strengthen it so that you can institutionalize membership there. But I think this point could go across any sort of constituent group that you're feeling like you're missing and want to leverage their contributions more. But that obviously shores things up because you're not going to have gaps when there's staff turnover, because the membership's not at the staff level, it's at the organizational level, and they know when they have staff turnover, they need to pretty quickly identify a new person to come to the meetings. And then recognizing and celebrating the coalition's achievements. And y'all may do this, that I'm not, so saying this doesn't mean that you didn't necessarily do it, but maybe it just didn't resonate with some of the feedback that we saw. But maybe doing an annual report and having achievements and highlights that were accomplished. I know you do that in the cancer plan, but maybe you do it midway between that 5-year period. And then cultivating diverse funding sources that really allow you to move towards that independent coalition who can advocate and do some work in the legislative arena if that's something that moves y'all, and then leadership development. So maybe really having some training in TA for the leadership, like for the steering committee and the leads of the work groups, to build their leadership capacities to help move things forward. And so that was all for our recommendations. Again, these are high level. We go into more detail in the report that we'll be sharing after this meeting. But we also wanted to highlight, we know that y'all have already been doing some really great work to address some of the gaps that were identified when we did the assessment. Y'all are working to formalize the definitions of membership and engagement. You're identifying gaps in membership and then recruiting to fill those gaps. You're developing a new member orientation. That's part of that overall, documentation that we keep talking about. And then you've onboarded a coalition, and I said coordination, sorry, coordinator to help coordinate and manage the coalition work and really like starting to look at those gaps in membership. So y'all have done a lot, and that's exciting to hear. And so I think if we had did the assessment even 6 months later, some of those results, I think, would be a little different because y'all had already been working on things that came up in the assessment. So y'all were ahead of the curve already and you didn't even know it.
Oh, so finally, we just, our next steps include incorporating the feedback that we got from you today in the report as we finalize that and get that back to you. But we're considering potentially conducting key informant interviews with some active members, including the steering committee members, and then some non-active members. So that's something that, that would just give more information, get a better understanding about what that, about that difference. But this was a quote that really sang to us. Coalition building is an art. More than anything else, it requires individuals and groups to be willing to rise above their feelings of separateness and to actively collaborate in the spirit of mutual understanding, patience, and flexibility. When members share responsibility, goals, decisions, and leadership, and energetically and enthusiastically work toward a common goal, a coalition has the potential for great success. And I think that, when you do an evaluation like this, you're going to turn over rocks and find things that aren't necessarily strengths and opportunities for improvement, but definitely we did find that there's a lot of strengths and positive aspects to your membership and the work that your coalition is doing. So that's us. That's what we have.
And we have about 5 minutes. We were hoping to have a little bit longer, but if there's any other lingering questions from particularly the areas that we covered that we didn't stop for reflection, we would welcome feedback or questions in the 5 minutes we have.
Hi, this is John Van Dorn. Thank you very much. I think that was quite helpful. And it was also reading some of the responses to the survey. I kind of, as a member of the steering committee and the co-chair, take some personal responsibility for, I think, some of the frustrations of the group. But reading, sort of summarizing some of the survey results, I think there's some frustration about being part of almost an amorphous entity with some ill-defined inputs and outputs. And that can be demoralizing if you're situation. Whereas when I, having been a part of the coalition and think about a lot of the developments over the past 5 or even 10 years, I think that there's actually quite a good narrative thread about what's going on, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and how we intend to get there. And there's an imperative, I think, to communicate where we are in that narrative arc. And I would say, for example, we had one of the things you want to avoid is being, that Bill Murray movie Groundhog Day, where you have the same conversation over and over and over, and people are expressing the same frustrations over and over and over. And you don't want to have the same conversation in March 2021 as you were having in March 2015. Now, we had some discussions and addressed some of these issues 5 even years ago, maybe even more. And we kind of tried to address some of the issues about that were brought up in the survey, as far as member engagement, as far as outputs, levels of productivity, and we had, and there is a story that's developed, which I think that we need to start communicating, and I think that is culminating in the cancer control plan that's we're going to talk about next. But I think that one of the things we've talked about in some previous groups is what our values are, and just starting with some very, very basic things, because if you don't share common values, you're going to disperse from the get-go. But we are a public service entity. You know, we're not competing with anyone. We're driven by goodwill, and the motivation is to reduce the cancer burden in the state of Wyoming. And that's it. And we are collaborative, and we're not competitive. Second is that we want to take a data-driven approach to this problem. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that it maximizes your impact. If you take a data-driven approach to both the problem and data-driven solution mechanisms of finding solutions. And second is that we're funded by the CDC in part, and we need to justify ourselves to them appropriately by saying we have implemented these measures and this is our output. And so over the past few years, we've had an approach, and if anybody takes issues with this narrative thread, please share. But one of our approaches was to sort of understand as best we could the problem that we're dealing with. And Joe Grand Prix has been very helpful with that. And a few years ago, we really took a hard look at some of the cancer statistics in Wyoming. As far as, we do this every year. But as far as the rates of the incidence of cancer, what the different cancers are, and then also the major causes of mortality. And then getting those, and just to review, I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but number one incidence is prostate. I think then number 2 is breast, number 3 is lung, 4 is colorectal, and number 5 is melanoma, as I recall. And then as far as mortality, lung cancer is number 1. There's a grab bag of what we call the ill-defined cancers, number 2, pancreatic cancer, number 3, colorectal, number 4, and breast, number 5, as I recall. And if Joe, you're on the call and you need to correct me, let me know. But we took a data-driven approach to what was the problem that we're trying to address on behalf of the residents of Wyoming. And then we tried to strategize how we might do that, how we might address that. And we even talked about I brought up bringing a disease-specific approach, like saying having a breast cancer work group, having a prostate cancer work group, colorectal, etc. But in the end, we came up with 4 work groups. We felt that the best strategy was to have a 4 work group approach, which was prevention of screening and early detection, number 2, number 3, survivorship, and number 4, childhood cancer. And so those are our 4 work groups. And then so we arrived at that kind of strategy. And then the next thing we did was we got baseline data in all those key areas, and then and we've done this over the past year or two, in building up to this cancer control plan that we're about to discuss. And then based on the baseline data, we said, how can we improve upon that? And what are our goals for improving upon those baseline statistics in the next 5 years, in the next 5-year cancer control plan? And then the final thing they see as part of the important narrative thread is, how do you do that? And so we've tried to empower some of the members of the work groups with, for example, we brought in the George Washington group. This is a sort of representatives of national and organizers of cancer coalitions nationwide, which have data-driven approaches to affect change and implement the goals as established, like data-driven approaches to increasing breast cancer survival and awareness, colorectal, prostate, etc. So we tried to empower the work groups with a collaborator with evidence-based interventions to meet the goals. And but anyway, I think what I wanted to share was that I would be really frustrated if I was in a group that where I didn't see a narrative thread or a structure or a momentum. And I do think that we have a structure, and I think we have a momentum. I think that we have an arc, as I say, a narrative thread that's progressing. And I feel like maybe it's our job to communicate that as far as member engagement, that we are doing, important things, and that we share common values. Now, we have a lot of, as any organization, we have much opportunity for improvement. But I think that there are some basic elements that we've been trying to establish over the past half decade, again, to avoid the Groundhog Day conversation. We have made some progress. So I just wanted to share that I really, one of the important things of all the presentations so far is that there's a clear, I think, difference in perception of the organization that I have as part of the steering committee versus maybe somebody who's a member, because maybe I'm more privy to some of the storyline.
I think that's a beautiful way to frame it. Is that narrative? There is a narrative thread. Y'all have a narrative as y'all have developed and evolved over time, and I think and that did come through. I just think it's shoring that up a little bit more. I think that's my key takeaway. It's all the ingredients or the pieces of the story are there. It's just tying them together so that everyone, whether you're a steering committee representative or a brand new member, you get that narrative at the immediately and can latch on to that narrative. And I really like that framing of that.